I was kicked out at the age of 17. I entered their ideal life 9 years later and set it on fire. You allowed her entry? My mother's voice was that. Not shouting, not even lifted. Just the sound of poison sneaking beneath a door. A piercing hiss through clamped teeth. I had only entered the foyer when I felt cold. Not from the air, but from them. My dad didn't even bother to look back. With her arms folded and her lips twisted into a flawless little grin, my sister stood next to him. It was the same one she wore every time I had a poor experience. The sort of grin you might expect from someone who witnessed a vehicle accident they caused. My name was not mentioned by anyone. Their daughter wasn't me. I wasn't a visitor. To them, I wasn't even human. I simply caused a disturbance, a discoloration. And after 9 years, I received that greeting. I can still clearly recall the day I was thrown out. I was 17 years old. Fairview had just been slapped across the face by winter. The kind of cold that burns your flesh and pierces your stockings. With a torn bag and $14.82 in my pocket, I stood before the front door of the 3-story colonial house where I grew up, which had white columns and an excessive number of empty rooms. The hoodie I was wearing hardly zipped. I had purple fingers. An embrace was absent. Not a warning. Only one sentence. My father had said, "Amelia, you're grown now. Go and look after yourself." That was it. Swirling a glass of red wine. My mother gazed from behind the curtain in the living room, as if she were witnessing the last act of a show she had become tired of. The family gem and golden child, my sister Vanessa, recorded me leaving like it was a comedy sketch on Instagram. I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I simply turned to leave. I had vowed to myself that I would never beg again. I traveled 5 kilometers to a 24-hour petrol station downtown that night in the dark. In an attempt to blend in with the wind that sliced like shards of glass, I snuggled up beneath a rusting bus stop shelter with my sweatshirt pulled tight. I ignored the screaming in my stomach. Tears were threatened. However, I was aware. In any case, they would simply freeze on my cheeks. I was stiff, hungry, and invisible when I woke up the following morning. I explored every bakery, cafe, and store with a help wanted sign in the window as if I were a ghost wandering the city. No ID, though? No address? Not a chance. I was 17 years old. No one, officially. I attempted to sleep that night near to the kitchen vent where warm air blew out, behind McKinley's Deli. It was the only warmth I could find, yet the air smelled like cooked onions and grease. I tried a car wash on the 3rd day. "We don't hire strays," the boss stated after giving me a thorough examination. Yes, strays. All I wanted to do was yell, hit a wall, or pass out. However, I didn't. I simply turned around, nodded, and continued to walk. You either keep walking or you die. That's what you do when you're alone. A man twice my size, unconscious and holding an empty bottle, took McKinley's vent spot that evening. I wasn't a moron. I didn't come close. Once more, I wandered, legs trembling, wind-raw skin. I found myself behind Ruby's Grill, a little eatery sandwiched between a mechanic's garage and a pawn store. The rear door was slightly ajar, like it was beckoning me in. Yellow light poured out. I took a quick look. "Why in the world are you back here?" I leaped. A woman with wild curly hair, a flower-streaked apron, and a sword-sized ladle stood in the doorway. She gave me the impression that I was someone she had seen before, rather than a complete stranger. Like a tale whose conclusion she already knew, I began to retreat. She responded, "You might as well mop the damn floor first if you're going to sleep behind my kitchen." Ruby Delaney was that woman, proprietor, cook, a human bullhorn. Additionally, I was treated like a human being for the first time in 3 days. She didn't inquire about my past, didn't inquire as to my purpose. "Eat first, then clean," she continued, passing me a mop and pointing to the floor. On the counter sat a tray of noodles and stir-fried chicken. I ate as though I hadn't eaten in a week. Ruby gestured in the direction of the storage room after I had completed washing the floor until midnight. "Back there is a mattress. Unclean. Not cozy. Better than the sidewalk, though." I tried not to cry as I nodded. I wasn't freezing and I wasn't by myself for the first time since I was expelled. Still smelling of grease and dish detergent, I snuggled up in that dusty little chamber and closed my eyes. Most likely, my family was enjoying wine by the fireplace. However, I had a floor, four walls, and a pain-free belly, and I realized that somehow I needed to start there. Ruby gave directions before the sun rose the following morning. Pots clanged. The bacon sizzled. I moved despite having damaged knees and weary arms. No inquiries, no sympathy. Simply put, work. One did the dishwashing, hauled garbage, potatoes that have been peeled. I soiled my sneakers in soapy water and burned my fingertips on hot pans. And what do you know? I felt helpful for the first time in my life. 3 days later, Ruby threw me a broken plastic name tag and an old outfit. Amelia, the kitchen helper, I nearly burst into tears. Not because it was lovely, but because I had been given a name once more. A part. A place in the world that wasn't merely stray or disappointment. I was never commended by Ruby. However, she noticed me. She would leave bandages on the shelf when my hands grew red from washing without gloves. She would leave a sandwich under the register when I skipped meals in order to work longer shifts. Kindness in silence. She once said, "You're not a bad kid," as I was cleaning the stove. "You were expelled from the nest sooner than most people." I spent almost a year living behind Ruby's grill. Performed 2 shifts. Saved every cent. Candy was skipped sleep. Studied for the GED using books from the library. Every time I considered giving up, I recalled my mother's bored, icy voice calling me a burden. And each time I recalled that, I clung more tightly. Ruby didn't applaud me when I passed the GED. "Congratulations!" she murmured, placing a cupcake on the counter with a candle that was flickering. "It begins now." She was correct, because that was only the start. I had a backpack and $68. In any case, I created my own future. I can still clearly recall the day the acceptance letter arrived. As I tossed trash into the dumpster behind Ruby's cafe, I pondered how much my next phone bill would be. I had icy hands. 2 hours after I had burned my finger on a fryer basket, the blister was already irate. Then I noticed it, though. Nestled below the register was a soft yellow envelope. It had my name written in blue ink, hurried and sloppy. Most likely Ruby's handwriting, because I didn't have a physical address. It had been delivered to the diner by her. With my hands still sticky from the garbage bags, I opened it there. "Congratulations, Amelia Hayes. Welcome to Central Oregon Community College." I was unable to breathe for a whole 5 seconds. I didn't think it would succeed. No parent was available to co-sign anything on my behalf. I used a used Chromebook with a broken e-key to write my application essay. What about my transcript? One lengthy text regarding my work at Ruby's and scans of my JED results that are hardly readable. However, they let me in somehow. Ruby didn't say much when I informed her, simply gazed at me for a moment before tossing an old key ring onto the counter. She declared, "You now have the room upstairs. If you're a college girl, a storage closet won't cut it." I felt like crying. Once more. But since Ruby didn't give hugs, I simply said, "Thanks." And truthfully, I didn't require one. That evening, I moved into the small space above the diner with my 3 sets of clothes, books, and an old desk I had discovered on the pavement. It had a window, but the walls were thin and the faucet was often dripping. And there was just enough moonlight coming in through that window for me to think that, perhaps, just possibly, my life was turning around. I arrived at college wearing my sole pair of clean clothes, with my hair pushed back and a beaten rucksack thrown over my shoulder. Parents assisted them in moving into their dorms, and everyone else had laptops and matching hoodies. Me? That night, I worked 2 shifts at the diner, had 3 granola bars, and had $68. Nevertheless, I entered those doors as though I were welcome, since I deserved that seat. I didn't get it. As if my life depended on it, I studied. Since it did, class was held during the day. Dishwashing and replenishing napkin trays were done at night. It was a luxury to sleep. I occasionally received 3 hours. Not always. And when my hands hurt, I thought about how it hurt to be 17 and standing outside that house, chilly and unwelcome. I recalled my sister's voice on the stairs, laughing as I was ejected. When my eyes burnt from reading too much. When I wanted to give up, I thought of how silent, completely silent my parents had been when they never called to check on me. I was pushed more by that quiet than by any inspirational saying. Since I knew I couldn't work for someone else forever, I decided to major in business. I had to learn about money, not just how to make it, but also how to accumulate it, how to cultivate it, how to prevent someone from using it as a leash. Ruby didn't say much, but when she knew I would be studying late, she always left extra food out. A coffee thermos. A silent gesture of concern for a pie that had to go anyhow. She didn't inquire about my relatives. Never again did you treat me like a stray. She once remarked, some kids get dropped into the ocean early. That doesn't mean kids can't pick up swimming skills. I was close to the top of my class when I graduated. No gown and cap. There are no family members in the audience. I walked across the stage to no applause. I filmed myself walking across that small college gym stage, though, using a borrowed navy dress, a trembling hand holding my phone, and a small, pre-paid tripod. Later that evening, I repeatedly viewed the film in my room above Ruby's to make sure it was authentic. I murmured to the television, Amelia, you made it through. Ruby silently slid a piece of lemon pie over the counter that evening. Just a single nod. That's how she defined pride. Portland followed. I received full scholarship acceptance to the Portland Business Institute. I had a long shot. Everything is pricey, the program is prestigious, and the city is large. And I entered. I had a spiral notebook full of hand-sketched dreams, and $68 in my pocket when I got there. 3 strangers and I shared a room. On the weekends, I waited tables. In between classes, I ate $1 ramen. Studied starting at 6 in the morning, until 2 in the morning. Most of the time. No gatherings, no weekends. No visits from relatives. I didn't care, though. I was constructing something. I submitted applications for internships at boutique food labs, hospital supply chains, and even an organic milk business that offered cheese as payment. I didn't give a damn. I was curious to find out. Next, I came across Nutromedics, a small firm that specializes on medicinal nutrition for cancer patients. They gave me a credential and allowed me to observe every meeting, but I didn't get paid. I also paid attention. Hard. In the supply room, I made notes, observed warehouse employees, seen the writing of contracts, the pitching of branding, and the discreet handling of failure behind closed doors. It wasn't glitzy. At last, though, I was in the room. I graduated from high school 2 years later. However, the concept I had been developing all along, like a secret seed I was waiting to plant, was more important than the grades. A company that produced customized nutrition solutions for patients with diabetes, heart patients, and surgical patients recuperating from surgery. I gave it the name Reclaim, because I had been reclaiming my name, my future, and my value since I was 17 years old. I sent it to all of the local accelerators and funds I could locate. Most people chuckled. Some people paid attention. Yes, one said. I started from scratch, added all the money I had saved, and took out a little startup loan. In my kitchen, I packed boxes. I delivered them by riding my bike across the city. I conducted late-night live streams to audiences of 5 or 6 individuals, outlining the advantages of my product. I didn't give a damn. They were paying attention. 3 years passed. Slowly, however, Reclaim began to burn. We were picked up by hospitals. Our formulae were recommended by dietitians. Thank you notes were sent by parents of ill children. By my 25th birthday, Reclaim was earning more than $5 million annually. We reached a valuation of $20 million a year later, and the reporter asked me, "So what was your big break?" One evening when I was interviewed for a local business publication. I grinned, leaned closer, and stated, "It began with a mop and a woman who didn't inquire about my origins. Here's the problem, though. The cold was still fresh in my mind, the quiet, the pain of forgetfulness. And that recollection was always there. All it became was something sharper, something more targeted. Because even though I'm now referred to as CEO, founder, or even inspirational by the Globe, I remained Amelia Hayes. My relatives threw the girl out like trash, and I was returning, whether they realized it or not. Not to exact revenge, not quite yet, but just to let them know I wasn't gone. And I wasn't broken at all. A cream envelope containing the invitation arrived. I ought to have thrown it out. On a Tuesday, it appeared. An ordinary mail drop with an electric bill, junk coupons, and an alumni board item, followed by that envelope. Cream-colored and thick, gold embossed, too costly for a celebration. Spam is too formal. Even before I opened it, I knew what it was. Vanessa Hayes is the name on the return address. My sister. The golden one. The reason she uploaded well-groomed selfies among palm trees while I was sleeping behind a cafe kitchen. I held the envelope for a long time in the hallway of my apartment. It was thicker than paper ought to be, as if it were inhabited by spirits. I wanted to tear it to pieces. A part of me wanted to burn it. I opened it instead. You are cordially invited by the Hayes family to celebrate Vanessa Hayes and Lucas Reed's engagement. I didn't even complete the remaining tasks. I clenched my hand. I clenched my jaw. My chest went rigid in the middle. Warmly welcomes. It's funny. They were unable to even inquire as to whether I had enough money for the bus 9 years ago. I was being invited to a ballroom with crystal lights and champagne now. The invitation fell face down onto the counter after slipping out of my grasp. I looked at it for a long time. It's long enough to blur the cheap gold writing. Vanessa was getting married. To Lucas. They also want for me to be there. Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps it was merely a show. Another mask to maintain appearances. I didn't answer. Not right away. However, I was unable to get rid of it for the remainder of that week. I saw that foyer every time I closed my eyes. A chilly look from my mother. My sister's self-satisfied little smile. The back of my father was always turned away. If I appeared, what would they do? Would they even know who I was? Would they once more act as though I weren't real? I told myself it didn't matter. That I was now too much above it, too far gone. I owned a business. I had customers. I lived a life. However, some wounds itch just before they heal completely. What about this one? The bleeding had resumed. I was at Grace's bakery 3 nights later. My tiny sanctuary at night. There was a booth in the corner that always felt like mine. Soft jazz music playing, and dim lighting. Nathan was drinking coffee across from me. He was aware of my thoughts. He did. With steady gaze, he said, "Talk. You appear to be attempting to avoid vomiting." I moved the invitation to the other side of the table. He lifted it, glanced at it, and then arched an eyebrow. Whoa. They are becoming more audacious. With a flat voice, I said, "They want me there. They want you to keep quiet." That hit hard. Nathan was never a showman. Never be mean. Just be truthful. He was correct. I replied, "I'm sure they're thinking I'll sit in the back, smile politely, and go before dessert." With his fingers wrapped around his cup, he leaned forward. "But you're not going to do that, are you?" I didn't respond. Because, actually, I hadn't made up my mind. There was a part of me that wanted to stay home, eat cake, and let their falsehoods fester. The other portion, the portion that recalled each night spent in that cafe, each scar on my hands, and each tear I had to swallow in order to live, that was the portion that wanted to appear. I allowed a week for myself. A week to reflect, to chill off, in order to ensure that I wasn't stepping into a trap. 3 more times I read the invitation. Even checked up the location, the Grand Hotel in Ashbury. Naturally, costly, light. The sort of restaurant that served only foreign wine and hand-cut ice. Finally, one morning, I decided what to do. Not because I was angry, not in retaliation, just some clarity. I had been creating my life from scratch for almost 10 years. I had escaped hell by clawing my way out. They now wanted to act as though we were a single, contented family. They wanted to stand on a mountain of falsehoods, grin, sip champagne, and wear pearls. I refrained from screaming. I had no intention of begging. I intended to enter and let the truth speak for itself. I found the dress with Nathan's aid. It had a silhouette that suggested, "I'm not here to please you," and was sleeveless and deep burgundy. We wore a black handbag with it. Easy. Classy. Naturally, it was also large enough to accommodate my needs. 2 envelopes, both sealed. A single flash disc, with a gold-sealed certification document. Facts. Actual ones. Not the ones that break under stress. the type that destroys illusions with a single, crisp blow. The city was covered in snow on the night of the celebration, only enough to gleam in the streetlights. I entered the Ashbury Grand at 7:28 p.m. My footsteps reverberated on the marble floor. I was struck like a wave by the fragrance of polished wood, perfume, and too much money. I got no greetings. However, I didn't require an escort. I passed the servers, the coat check, and the visitors with wide eyes. Because I did, I walked like though I belonged. I left this family 9 years ago with $14 sand, a torn rucksack. I wore Valentino when I came back tonight, bearing the burden of all the truths they attempted to conceal. Then I caught sight of them. My dad at the pub, my mom is by the stage, and Vanessa, who was gleaming in white and cream, laughing as if nothing had touched her, with her arm hooked around Lucas's. At first, they didn't notice me. However, when did they? Time paused. The glass in Lucas's palm shook. His wide, bewildered eyes met mine as if he had witnessed a resurrection. The sound of my mother's words pierced the atmosphere like lightning. "Oh, see." She managed to go inside. Suddenly, everyone's heads turned. My sister went cold. She stopped smiling. My dad made the traditional action of turning aside. And me? I entered slowly and steadily. Don't cry, no rage. Simply being there. The kind that, even before the fire begins, permeates a room like smoke. Her engagement wasn't ruined by me. I arrived to put an end to their delusion. There wasn't a total silence in the room. However, something changed. It was palpable in the air. When people sense something is wrong, they all let out a deep, collective exhale, but nobody wants to be the first to say it aloud. For about 4 seconds, I just stood there and let them gaze at me. Nothing to say. No grin. Don't pretend to be warm. Simply make eye contact, beside my sister, alongside Lucas, with the parents who, like a poor first draft, had wiped me out of their version of history. Vanessa was the first to blink. Her arm was released by Lucas. What about my mom? As if it were the only thing holding her up. She groped for her wine. I walked over to the stage. Unsure if I was part of the play or ready to loot the establishment, the host paused when I approached him while he was rambling through some corny, pre-written spiel about love and legacy. "Don't worry," I said, leaning in a little. "I'm related." When I took it, the microphone gave a small squeak. It's the type of noise that briefly stops all conversations in the room. Excellent. I glanced across the ballroom, where I was being watched like an unplanned cyclone by strangers dressed in silk, old money in fitted suits, and people with big eyes and quivering mouths. Then Vanessa and I looked at each other. "My name is Amelia Hayes," I said in a cool, even voice. The crowd echoed with a murmur. "Charles and Marjorie Hayes have me as their eldest daughter. The family newsletter does not contain it. The person who is absent from their Christmas cards. When I was 17, they expelled me. Quiet, stretched and thick. I didn't speak louder. Did not have to. This lovely engagement has a backstory," I added, turning to face Vanessa and Lucas. "Fortunately for you, I've arrived ready." I held up the flash drive after removing it from my clutch. Emails, bank records, pictures, communications, everything you don't want people to see when you're trying to build a lie-based life. Then Vanessa came forward, her voice weak and piercing. "This is not what you're doing. You have no right to ruin my—" I interrupted her. "Ruin? No. Nothing is going to be ruined by me. You omitted to mention that you were still together when you sent your boyfriend to see how I was doing a year ago." The audience let out a gasp. Literally. You'd think I wrote the script. Lucas stepped back completely, his face completely whitened out. "Yes," I replied, turning to face him. "She warned you about my dangers, that I was insane. I made it all up, but you were wiser. Nevertheless, you continued to text." I displayed the other envelope. "Every message you sent me is in this one. Each and every screenshot. I wish I had met you first." I gave Vanessa another glance. "Tell me, sis, how does it feel to know that the sister you disowned nearly stole your fiancé?" Now, people weren't even trying to hide their gazes. With her face fixed on a half-smile that she couldn't seem to get rid of, my mother remained motionless close to the cake table. My father had vanished, most likely checking the exits or lurking behind the caterers. Vanessa was trembling. She resembled a chandelier on the verge of collapsing more than a bride. I placed the envelopes on the edge of the platform and declared, "I'm not here to fight. I don't even intend to stay here. I simply came to give back what you had taken." I took the certified papers out of my handbag, the one bearing the court stamp that formally removed my name from their estate, medical proxy, and trust fund. I said, "You owe me nothing anymore. And I definitely don't owe you anything for keeping quiet." I set down the paper next to the flash drive. I then took a step back, gave the astonished host the microphone, and said into the void, "Vanessa, congratulations. Everyone is now aware of your identity." I did not linger for a round of applause, didn't require the consequences, had no desire for the aftershocks. I left that ballroom with my hands empty and my head held high. I wasn't bearing the burden of who people claimed I was for the first time in my life. I wasn't putting up with their embarrassment or believing their falsehoods. I was simply me, Amelia, survivor, constructor, breaker of fairy stories in the family. Just as the first snowflakes began to fall, I arrived at the curb. That night, the city appeared slower and more subdued, as if it were allowing me room to breathe. After a few seconds, Nathan's vehicle arrived. When I got in, he remained silent, simply gave me a hot cocoa cup to take with me and waited. As I took a slow sip, I observed the steam curling on the window. "All right?" "At last," he inquired. I grinned. "It's finished," I declared. "The past was placed on a silver tray by me. They can discard it or choke on it. In any case, it is no longer mine." He gave a nod. "I'm proud of you." I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because I didn't feel like a shadow for the first time since I was 17. I felt as though the storm had finally passed. I believed it to be over. She knocked on my door after that. 3 weeks had passed since the engagement celebration, long enough for the news stories to fade, long enough for the conversations in the family group to break down, long enough to stop me from waking up in anticipation of receiving another text from an unidentified number. That must be it, I thought. That had gone away after dropping the truth like a stone in the river. Truth doesn't just sink, though. It trembles. Additionally, some people come in search of the splash. The Sunday morning was calm. The news was playing softly in the background as I brewed coffee in my sleep shirt, still barefoot. Not a drama. No stress. Simply the hum of everyday life, the kind I created for myself. And then there was a knock. Gentle, hesitant. Not a neighbor, not UPS. It was not Nathan who knocked. Half expecting a lost tourist, or perhaps some clipboard religious people, I opened the door. However, it was her, Vanessa. The hair was pulled back, bare-faced, not wearing any jewelry, only her, and a paper bag gripped her chest as if it would prevent her from falling apart. Neither of us said anything while we stood there. She appeared to be deflated, not degraded or broken. For the first time in her life, it was just real, as if she had just emerged from her well-constructed world and was unable to breathe normal air. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard her say. "I didn't come to fight," I answered. "I didn't think you had the courage to come at all, not with malice. Just the truth." She gave a nod, took the hit. The paper bag was then presented as a peace accord. "I brought pie." I blinked. "From Ruby's," she continued. At that moment, my heart did something strange. Twisted. I picked up the bag. It's not that I pardoned her, but after everything, I appreciated the effort it took to come to my door. I said, "Come in. Take off your shoes." We sat at the island in my kitchen. Still warm, the pie sat between us. Vanessa left hers alone. She just used her thumb to trace the plate's edge. "They're enraged," she remarked. "Well," I replied, startled. She looked up. "The entire story has been rewritten," she added. "We were told that you ambushed us, claimed that you manipulated everything, that you're not stable." I gave a shrug. "Their brand is that." She paused. Lucas departed, a week following the celebration. I waited. I only wanted her to sit in it for a moment, not out of courtesy. "You were correct," she murmured at last. "Almost everything. He was messaging you, and I knew it. I didn't give a damn. I believed I had already triumphed. It was there, the authentic voice, not well polished. unfiltered for a viewership. She went on, I didn't come here to explain or request that you forget it. I am aware of what I did. Why are you here then? I inquired. She took a swallow. Because that night was the last time I slept. There was a dense quiet between us. Back then, I didn't consider you a person, she remarked. Just something in the way. I gave a nod. That was the sensation. Vanessa's gaze shifted to her hands. She had chipped nails. She never let them to chip before. I was envious of you, she acknowledged. That? I didn't anticipate it. You were always more intelligent, more resilient, and it became quieter when you went. However, things didn't improve. It simply became phony. I didn't answer. For my own benefit, not hers, I allowed her to talk. She had to tell it to me, aloud, where it was no longer able to hide. At last, she confessed, I used you to maintain harmony, to be the good daughter. You deserved it, I reminded myself, that you were very theatrical, an issue. Then, tears clinging to her lashes, she glanced up at me. Not ones that are performed. The type that causes your throat to swell because you're choking on guilt that you can't release. I was mistaken. I didn't do it. Give it some air, she declared. I'm not requesting a relationship. I simply had to be honest with you, in person. Not for you. For me, that's the problem. That is the distinction between peace and forgiveness. It is possible to extend forgiveness, perhaps. One day. Peace, though? When the person who wronged you finally sees it, you know that you no longer need to bear it. That's peace. We didn't give each other hugs. We didn't share a tear. As the snow began to fall outside, we simply sat in a peaceful kitchen and enjoyed a slice of lemon pie. 20 minutes later, she got to her feet. I appreciate you not slamming the door. I appreciate you not acting. Vanessa gave a tiny, worn-out, genuine smile. After that, she departed. Outside my window, I observed the snow accumulation on the railing. I allowed myself to feel everything. Not anger, not triumph. Simply said, a gentle release. Not every tale has a wrecked protagonist. In some, someone wakes up in the end. And me? I didn't have to return. I didn't require approval. Because without their money, their falsehoods, or their name, I had already created something genuine. Amelia Hayes is my name. When I was 17, I was disowned. I created a life out of nothing. And one evening, I entered a ballroom and gave them back all of their embarrassment. Not to exact revenge, but because the stillness they left me in needed to be broken by the truth. And now? I'm free now.